Thank you. Thank you for being here. Good afternoon. So my name is Ramaya Krishnan. I'm the Dean of the Heinz College of Information Systems and Public Policy here at Carnegie Mellon. On behalf of President Farnam Jahanian, Provost Jim Garrett, and everyone at the Heinz College and everyone in our Carnegie Mellon community, I'd like to warmly welcome all of you in the audience, as well as everyone watching at home today, to this senatorial primary debate. Today we are gathered in this beautiful Simmons Auditorium for the Barbara Daly Denko Political Forum, where we will hear from the candidates who are competing to be the Democratic Party's nominee for the US Senator from Pennsylvania. I'd like to thank the candidates who have joined us for today's forum. I know you're all very excited to hear a vigorous exchange of ideas. I'd also like to thank the 14th Ward Democratic Committee and the 14th Ward Independent Democratic Club for collaborating with us to make this event possible. The upcoming election for the US Senate in Pennsylvania has national implications and may very well decide the partisan balance of the United States Senate. The man-made crisis of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the suffering it has caused is a stark reminder of how important democracy is and how precious our democracy is. Your participation in our democracy matters. Pennsylvania's primary election takes place on Tuesday, May 17th, and if you are eligible to vote, I encourage you to make sure that you're registered so you can fully participate in both the primary election in May as well as the general election in November. As Carnegie Mellon School of Public Policy, we at the Heinz College have a focus on what has been dubbed public interest technology, in examining the many ways that technology and data intersect with policy and society. As the world becomes increasingly digitized, how can we harness the power of advanced analytic techniques and social science methods to improve the quality of life in an equitable way? How can we use data for social good? Our faculty, students, and research centers apply this thinking to domains across the public sphere that in many cases are rapidly evolving. They include healthcare access, delivery and outcomes, criminal justice policy and reform, smart communities and transportation, cybersecurity and data privacy, energy and environmental policy, automation and the future of work, and of course, safeguarding our democracy. These are complex issues that are often highly interconnected. We believe that rigorous analytical training can help prepare future public servants to meet these challenges. That is the Carnegie Mellon way. I hope that we will have a chance to hear the candidates discuss their views this afternoon on some of these really important issues. I want to end by saying that Carnegie Mellon University is deeply committed to the city of Pittsburgh, the greater Pittsburgh community, Allegheny County, and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Our Metro 21 Smart Cities Institute, the new Center for Shared Prosperity, and the Block Center of Technology and Society are examples of Carnegie Mellon's investment in pioneering research that has a direct impact on our local and regional communities and individuals. I thank you once again for joining us today. It's so important for all of us to engage with civic leaders through events like this. It's vital to our democracy and our democratic process and gives us a valuable opportunity to ask questions and hear the candidates discuss their policy positions and priorities firsthand. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Caleb Brobst, and I am the president of CMU College Democrats, and I'm here to introduce the candidates. We have Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, State Assembly Person Malcolm Kenyatta, Alex Khalil, and United States House of Representative Member Connor Lamb. Our moderators today, Morgan Overton and Paul Klein, will be handling the debate, asking questions, and moderating. Enjoy a great debate.
Thank you very much. Before we begin today, just a couple of the rules of engagement. And this would be a reminder on both sides, and maybe most notably for our audience. But a few of the rules that I would ask, or that we would request that you keep in mind, is that for those who are gathered in this space today, we expect everyone to conduct themselves with, and this is a good start, civility, respect, and restraint. So for our audience members, if you do like something that you hear and feel very good about it, you should probably check or rein in the gusto and just smile broadly. Say what?
With our mask?
Please. And for those of you who hear something that you find troubling, annoying, or disturbing in some way, you might just want to grimace, and then we can move on from there. But as we proceed today, I'd like to share something with you, and particularly with the senatorial candidates. So when Harry Truman was elected to the Senate in 1935, the United States Senate being the greatest deliberative body in the world, in close competition with the Allegheny County Council, Truman was approached by one of the senior members of the body, who put his hand on Truman's shoulder and said, "Harry, for the first few months that you are here, you will look around and you will wonder how you got here. But after that, you'll wonder how the rest of us got here." So good luck today.
Thank you for that. All right, hello, candidates. Thank you for joining us. And I am going to kick off our first question. We are in Women's History Month, and the topic is on abortion. Women without adequate resources are already being denied access to abortion in many areas, and the current Supreme Court is likely to overturn Roe v. Wade. What will you do as senator to counter the assault on reproductive rights, including birth control and safe, accessible abortion? And we can start off with Mr. Fetterman.
Sure. 6 years ago, I was in a forum on your campus running for the United States Senate. And back then, I had said that abortion was under siege. We have to be mindful of what's at stake here. And I was proud to say that I had specific litmus tests for Supreme Court justice candidates. And one of them was the sanctity of Roe v. Wade. You know, that to me is a non-negotiable litmus test for any Supreme Court justice that I may be voting on. Furthermore, we have to make sure that we enshrine women's reproductive freedom and suspend and eliminate the filibuster and vote for the Women's Reproductive Freedom Act, because if Roe v. Wade does fall, we are going to be relegated to some states will have it, some states will not have it, and we will have the madness of a Texas-style law in states, even like Pennsylvania, if we lose the governor's mansion. You also heard that Missouri now is trying to enact legislation that would track people going out of state to get an abortion, which is also unacceptable for me. As lieutenant governor for 4 years, I'm proud to say that I have been the first line of defense in Pennsylvania should Governor Wolf have been unable to carry out his duties to veto the ridiculous, crazy Republican attempts to eliminate and destroy choice in our state. And I would have always leaned in there and would have had the veto pen ready for those or any attempts to eliminate or restrict women's reproductive freedom here in the Commonwealth.
Thank you. Mr. Kenyatta.
I think the troubling thing is we have to acknowledge the fact that the Supreme Court has already tacitly overturned Roe by allowing the Texas abortion bounty ban to stand. That is a direct affront to the protections that are outlined in many cases, most notably Roe v. Wade and cases subsequent that came after. What we have to do right now is win this seat. We have to win it by a big margin. We have to win it by sending a message that the values that we are fighting for as Democrats to protect the most fundamental right that people have to control your own body, that is under attack. And that is a value that we can make sure we do uphold in law once we have more senators than the current 50-50 split right now, a bigger, bolder majority. But we also have to understand, and I've understood as a legislator right now, that Pennsylvania, we have our own problems in terms of putting up boundaries and borders and hurdles for folks who want to get access to abortion. That's why myself and Representative Morgan Cephas, who is the co-chair of the Women's Health Caucus in Pennsylvania, we are sponsors of the Pennsylvania Women's Health Protection Act to make sure that in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, there are zero barriers for people who are seeking an abortion to get access to that care. I have said this for a long, long time, and it is as crystal clear as you can get. Abortion access is health care. Health care is a human right, and when I'm your senator, I'm going to make sure nobody stands in the way of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Khalil.
Thank you very much. As the only woman here, as the only sex that can have an abortion, I would like to say I would agree with my two colleagues here on excellent points. But I'd also like to point out that you asked a question, what would happen? So one, I think we have to point out the hypocrisy of the Republican Party. We know, for example, that in Pennsylvania, we had a former congressman, I believe, whose girlfriend had an abortion, right? So we have to call them out. We have to call them out when they sit back and fight the ACA, when the Republican Party went off and voted against CHIP. We have to call them out when they will not fund pre- and postnatal care, when they will not fund food stamps for families, when they will not fund education for children who reach 21 who are disabled and who age out, who will not fund. There was an attack at this last administration that attacked special education. We have to call them out on their hypocrisy. And my promise to you is this: I will make sure those programs, whether it is pre- and postnatal care through ACA or Medicare for All and Medicaid, will be covered. I will make sure that your child has proper funding for special education, because you cannot sit back and tell us, oh no, we're going to withhold your right to have an abortion, and then tell us you won't help us. I want to tell you a quick story. In 1968, my mother was told she had to have an abortion because the child inside of her was dying. My mother said no. And the state of New York said, we're going to show you what real pro-life is. They got us a nurse to take care of her 3 children. They helped us. This nurse stayed with us. My dad was able to work. They even offered us food stamps. And my dad said, no, I'm okay. I just need to work. And something else they did. They didn't charge us a penny. My mother was, my baby sister only lived 2 minutes. But my mother had a choice. And her choice was to go through with the pregnancy. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lamb.
Yes, we can basically boil the response to this question down to 2 very significant pieces of legislation. One is, I think the name that John was looking for is the Women's Health Protection Act, not the Women's Freedom Act. It has been written, co-sponsored, and passed already in the House of Representatives. I was a co-sponsor and was very happy to vote for it. That is the bill that would take Roe v. Wade, put it into law by statute. So no matter what the Supreme Court does, that right is there, and it's protected, and it's there forever. That doesn't fully address, though, what was in Morgan's question, which was, what do we do about the least advantaged? What do we do with women who don't earn very much money and are trapped in poverty and don't maybe have access to health care so that you can give them a right on paper, but how do we make that a right in reality? That is a second very important vote that we have taken in the House and needs to be taken in the Senate as well, and that's having to do with something called the Hyde Amendment. And that makes it impossible for Medicaid, which covers our least advantaged Americans with health insurance, allows them to provide abortion services, family planning services, things of that nature. This year in 2021, we, for the first time ever, voted down the Hyde Amendment in the House of Representatives so that Medicaid could cover all of these services. Those 2 things in combination are probably 2 votes away from becoming law in the United States Senate if we get rid of the filibuster. So if we all in here do our job this year, and we make sure that Pennsylvania provides one of those votes, we can put this issue to rest all around the country.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next line of questionings, speaks to concerns with respect to big tech. Should the federal government change the way it regulates or even move to break up any of the big four tech companies, most notably Amazon, Facebook, Google, or Apple, in order to protect its many stakeholders, which include workers, investors, and consumers? And if so, which would you regulate, why, and how? So why don't we kind of switch it up here, and why don't we start with Mr. Lamb?
Sure. Look, the antitrust side of this and breaking up big tech is important, and there are economic reasons that you could use to justify exactly that. Each one of those companies is a little bit different. But the more important, since I only have 2 minutes or whatever it is the content control and what is actually happening inside of an application like Facebook. I think that the more appropriate thing to be thinking about is the era before America had something like the FDA. People were able to sell food products and drug products all over our country with really no transparency at all about what was in the ingredients. Were they toxic? Were they not? Were the medicines efficacious? Were they not? You can easily make that analogy to the algorithms that Facebook uses to make sure that people are lied to thousands and thousands of times every single day about some of the most important civic questions that we have as a country. Now, whether it's the creation of an entire government department or simply we mandate transparency in the algorithms so that researchers and professionals all around the country can look at them and figure out exactly what it is that makes them so toxic, that is the sunshine that we need to solve the Facebook misinformation problem. So repealing Section 230, at least as it relates to Facebook, I think should be a given, because as soon as they have to face plaintiffs' lawyers anywhere, in all these states and all these federal courts, they're going to make some changes. But we have to get one step beyond that and make sure that the product itself is exposed to someone who does not work for Facebook and who can recommend the actual changes so that we can have a Facebook that delivers information that's reliable and is not, resulting in things like January 6th.
Thank you. Ms. Khalil?
Counselor, I'm Jenkintown counselor. Thank you. To me, I work in tech. I have worked in tech almost my entire career. What I see a problem with big tech is the buying up of small companies and the conglomeration and them getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think that's a big problem. And I agree that we have to work on with the antitrust issues. But I also think that we have to really call them out on outsourcing. They are major outsourcing of taking away American jobs and sending them abroad. And we're seeing that even much more so as we go to cloud computing. These are jobs that really we should be bringing back to keeping in the United States, whether it's help desk, coding, testing, business analysts, all along what I call the supply chain. As I said, I'm in IT. I'm an IT quality specialist. And we see jobs. I have been seeing jobs going out for now almost 20 years. And that has to stop. So we really have to have a carrot-stick approach when it comes up to the high-tech industry. And we have to tell them, you continue to outsource our jobs. We're going to limit the amount of government contracts you get. We're going to hit you there. And we really do have to stop them from consolidation of IT. Applications are made. You young people here at Carnegie Mellon, I'm sure, have your own tools that you're creating, some apps you're creating. Well, once you guys create it and sell it, it goes out into the ether, and next thing you know, your company is swallowed up. The assets are swallowed up, and everyone else who worked hard in your company is let go. So we really have to do something about protecting employees. We have to have just transition, and we have to really protect the U.S. From the the problems with the H-1B visa program. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Kenyatta.
You know what? We've all heard of banks that were too big to fail. And I think the tech company, we act as if these companies are too big to be broken up. I don't think it's good enough to just put some sunshine on these companies. We need structural change to the way they do business. And it starts with breaking up these companies. The level of the massive size of these companies is beyond what we think about when we think about the oil and rail barons of the Roaring '20s. This is worse than it's ever been, and there are real consequences for real people. It has been mentioned about the impact that this has on young people, on issues of anxiety, on rising levels of folks who have suicidal ideations. We think about Amazon not only being the marketplace for goods to be sold, but they're actually selling goods. And so if you're a small business owner who's trying to get your product out, or if you've just written a book and you're trying to sell that book, you have to deal with Amazon. And Amazon can choose and has chosen to put their products at the front of the line, putting small business owners at a real disadvantage. Facebook, by buying up not just Instagram, but WhatsApp, has controlled and put a real bottleneck on any communication around the world. And we've seen them not be willing to stand up to autocrats around the world and allow misinformation, disinformation to not just be used on their platform, but it is their business model to allow this misinformation and disinformation to flow. And we can go on and on and on, but the reality is we need a senator who's not afraid to say to big tech, if I get elected, I'm going to do everything in my power to break up that industry, and that's the commitment I make here to you today.
Thank you. Mr. Fetterman.
Yeah, the point isn't lost on me that we're dealing with a question about big tech on the campus of the world's leading technology university. I mean, it's a positive thing, right? The new industries, the way that it's changed our society, the way it's transformed our economy. The question, with all due respect, assumes that it's almost like a zero-sum game where it's become a bad thing, and it's actually been rather transformative for our economy. And I'm proud to say, as someone who lives directly across the street from Andrew Carnegie, and his steel industry that built this university, that next wave of innovation has been transformative for our society, but economically as well for our country. That being said, the single most important issue I see when it comes to big tech and these issues is the alternative universe, the misinformation. Misinformation needs a champion, and they had that in Donald Trump. They had that champion, and he legitimized and pushed to 90 million of his followers and created an environment that was increasingly dangerous, increasingly destabilizing, and un-American, quite frankly, what he was willing to do. And the power that he had just on a single smartphone was astonishing. That he was rightly reined in, and we need to bring a level of accountability to social media and these tech companies, quite frankly, because we can't ever be in a situation where our democracy is being undermined by an industry that refuses to hold itself accountable, that can do things anonymously, and considers itself outside the law based on a technicality or a law here or there. We must hold these companies accountable for the damage they pose, theoretically, to our democracy and make the appropriate changes.
Thank you. All right, candidates, this next question is regarding Build Back Better. And the question says, it is likely that cuts in the Build Back Better Act will be necessary for it to pass. What parts of Build Back Better would you prioritize, and which would you be willing to eliminate or cut back on? And let's shake it up a little bit. Mr. Kenyatta, kick us off.
The real question is, who are we willing to throw under the bus? Because whenever we're talking about negotiating a big piece of legislation, and I've been a part of that as well, we have to make sure that the things we aren't getting rid of aren't the things that people who have borne the brunt of government's inaction on so many of these structural issues, that they don't get left behind. We're seeing right now that the current, and there have been so many iterations, but who knows if we're going to have a Build Back Better that has universal pre-K the way that we need, the plan that the president ran on and has been trying to get passed through the Senate. But we need a plan that includes that. We need a plan that does make sure it has 2 years of tuition-free college for our community colleges. We need a plan that actually helps folks right now who are being hit over the head with the cost of childcare, which has ballooned as the amount of providers and the struggles that they're going through has made them to contract in many areas and for many reasons. We have to have a plan that does expand Medicare, that does lower that age, that does include things like vision, in dental, in hearing. We need to get those things done. The issue with getting Build Back Better passed is not that the bill is too expansive, but we had some people who ran as Democrats who endorsed President Biden, and also President Obama, and then got to the Senate and are now trying to roll back things that can transform our economy in a way that lifts up working people and working families. And so at this point, it is clear the Senate is not going to move, but when we have a bigger, bolder majority in the Senate, I'm going to the Senate to get every single one of those things that people here in Pennsylvania and across the country elected President Biden and a Democratic House and Senate to get done.
Thank you. Mr. Lamb.
Yes, and Morgan, I'm going to answer your question. I voted for Build Back Better. I was for it when it was $3 trillion. I was for it when it was $2 trillion. If we had to choose one thing out of it to get done this year, which I think is what you were asking, the most important, in my view, thing that we could do to help a lot of people in our state and put ourselves in a position to win this Senate seat, which is ultimately, I think, the reason we're all here, would be to allow Medicare to bargain over the price of prescription drugs. Once we do that, every person in this room is going to pay less for prescription drugs, whether they're on Medicare or not. But the government will save $300 to $400 billion at least over the next decade, because the government buys a third of all the drugs in the United States. We would take that money, and that is how we would pay for adding vision, dental, and hearing coverage into the Medicare program for free. Why am I emphasizing this? Because one of the things I can bring you today is the experience of someone who has campaigned outside of the 14th Ward for the last 4 years, in areas where it can be difficult for us to win votes. There is not a voter I have encountered in the last 4 years who I would not be enthusiastic about going to and saying, you have two options in this general election, and it's not even Democratic and Republican. On one side, you have Dr. Oz, and he is offering you a long line of herbal supplements that he and his team have developed over the years of questionable validity. On the other side, you have lower drug prices, dentures, glasses, and hearing aids, all for free. Which one do you want? We will win votes. We will win independent votes, Republican votes, Democratic votes in Washington County, in Greene County, and Allegheny County, and in the center city of Philadelphia. In an era of rising prices, when the average Social Security benefit is $16,000 a year, they're not getting any extra money as costs go up. This is a major cost we can make go down for people, and would be very effective for us if we did it.
Thank you. Councilor Khalil.
I really like what these two guys said. I think it's great, and I think it's important. And I think it's important for everyone to realize that who we're not calling out are Republicans. Tell me a Republican who doesn't need prescription drugs. Tell me a Republican who doesn't need eyeglasses, especially seniors, or dental care. Tell me a Republican who doesn't care about American jobs. I went to Northeast Philadelphia, and there was a gentleman there, and I've got a rather progressive agenda, and he said to me, I don't agree with anything about your platform except jobs. He had been laid off, his job had been outsourced 5 times. And so why is Build Back Better important? Yes, negotiating prescription drugs is very important. Yes, child care, free education is very important. And I'm not going to give up on those. Those have to be on the table. But what is also important is the fact that Build Back Better brings back American jobs to the United States. It is an industrial policy, perhaps the best in a generation, in which guarantees, through a carrot and stick approach, that manufacturing stays here in the United States. What does it do? It tells foreign countries, hey, manufacture in the United States. Where? In distressed communities like Pennsylvania, like Philadelphia, like Allegheny County, like Schuylkill, like Clarion. Come here, and we will, in distressed communities, give you carrots. Offshore those jobs, bring them in based on your faulty dollar policy, and we will hit you with a carrot, with a stick. That is why we need the whole package. Prescription drug negotiation, all that Malcolm said, child care, tuition, free tuition, and fighting for American jobs. Republicans cannot beat us on that. We need to call them out on that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Fetterman.
We're talking about Build Back Better in the past tense. It's been called dead. And it is dead. Why is it dead? Because we, as Democrats, didn't come together and vote like Democrats. That's a fact. That's a reality. you have perhaps one of the single most transformative pieces of legislation in my generation, if not longer. And it didn't get passed because our caucus didn't stand together. And I'm not making a judgment call or anything like that. I'm not mentioning anyone by name, or no disrespect to those senators that didn't vote that way. But I would be different than that. That's not a criticism. That's saying I would have voted for that if I was in the United States Senate. It's critical that we remember that we have the majority. We have the majority. And if I was your senator in that situation, the Build Back Better bill wouldn't have to be perfect. It wouldn't have to be tailored to my exact specifications. It would have to be what America needs. Picking my favorite aspect of Build Back Better, like me picking my favorite child, you know? The chance to reinvent our economy and transition away from a fossil fuel-based economy to a green and renewable energy one. That's not only we need that to save the planet, we need that to create millions and millions of good paying union jobs as well too. That's the truth. The truth is, if you want a senator that would have been a 51st vote and would not hold one of the most important pieces of legislation hostage, then that would have been me. That's why I'm running. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next subject is a small matter, climate change. And so scientists, climatologists across the globe agree that there is a deepening climate emergency. Extreme weather events are forcing the public to face the realities of global warming. So the question is, what specific policies and programs supporting investment in clean energy, transportation, green manufacturing, and resiliency will you work to implement as the most effective and politically realistic way to combat the climate crisis? And why don't we begin with Councilor
Thank you, sir.
Khalil.
I believe we have to lead with values, right? Because technology changes. Wind and solar technology changes. So we have to lead with values. And to me, the most important thing is to talk about environmental stewardship. To tell everyone that your neighbor should not be drinking either water filled with lead or water filled with fracking chemicals. So we must lead that way. And if we sit back and talk to people, regardless of whether they believe in climate change or not, I believe that we can sit back and get where we need to be. So we need to cap our oil wells. We need to cap our abandoned wells and our abandoned gas wells. We need to invest in high-speed rail across the Commonwealth. And I'll tell you, I'm from Jenkintown. The train station is only down the street. I have 3 ways of getting to work myself. But in other parts, as you go to Schuylkill, you go out to other parts like Clarion, there is no transportation. So we really need investments in public transportation, high-speed rail. I would sit back and tell you that Pennsylvania in particular has an incredible opportunity to get into geothermal. We have all these abandoned coal mines. So why not that? And then that in of itself makes those areas, those once coal countries, even more economically attractive, because what you end up having when you have geothermal is district heat. And so you don't even need gas to heat the homes, to heat the buildings, perhaps even to do many of the major manufacturing. Unfortunately, where we are today is almost 70% of our solar panels are made abroad. Our wind generators are made abroad. That's why we need Build Back Better, to make them here. And so while we're doing that, while we're getting these facilities built here in the United States to make solar panels, to make wind generators, let's invest in what we have. Let's work on different alternatives to fracking to extract gas. We have the brain power. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fetterman.
Sure. Back in 2009, the Obama administration, as well as the Environmental Defense Fund and the Blue-Green Alliance, was comprised of the Steelworkers and the Sierra Club, selected me to be kind of the face to promote and address climate change through the cap and trade legislation that the President Obama's administration wanted to pass as one of the first acts of his presidency. You know, we understood that the choice between climate crisis and economic development and jobs is a false one that the other side tries to push and tries to destroy. I also live across the street from a steel mill. I suspect that was the reason why I was selected, because that is the fulcrum of the debate that we are currently having in the world. It's like, we still need to make stuff in this country, you know? And I have been steadfastly talking about how important it is that we retain the manufacturing jobs and the energy jobs in Pennsylvania that currently provide our energy security as well, too. But we also must acknowledge and recognize that we have to transition away from these fuels to a green energy economy. Spoke about that in the last question with Build Back Better. To that point, I've never taken a dime from the fossil fuel industries. Never have, never will. My opinions aren't bought and paid for. They're what I've always said to be true. Democrats need to get honest about our energy security. Republicans need to get honest about climate change. And we need to work together and realize that this is not an instantaneous transformation. This is a transition that hopefully by the time my children are my age, we will be a green, renewable energy economy. And the work to do that begins certainly by helping, if I am lucky enough to be your next United States Senator.
Thank you. Mr. Kenyatta.
You know, climate change doesn't really care whether or not you think it's real. It's happening. And I will say that there's a real distinction among the folks on the stage as it relates to this issue. I've been unequivocal in saying that we need a moratorium on new approving of new permits for oil and gas drilling, period. Now, I know, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, you pride yourself on saying you haven't changed on this issue, but I actually went back and watched the forum that you had here when you were running last time, and you talked about even the Paris Climate Agreement not being good enough because it wasn't compulsory. Nations didn't have to meet the targets. You talked about us going bolder, and now you have said we need to get real. I will say this, the climate crisis hasn't changed, but on this issue you have. I think if we're going to deal with this, one of the most important things we can do is pass the Thrive Agenda, which has been supported by Majority Leader Schumer. We need to deal with issues in our buildings, making our buildings more energy efficient. We need to deal with transportation, expand light rail. We need to deal with our energy sources. In Pennsylvania, we will remain an energy leader, as we always have. But let's do it in the energy production methods of the future. Let's do it with wind. Let's do it with solar. Let's do it with geothermal, as was mentioned. Let's do it with bio. I think there's even a space in this equation for nuclear. But what there's not a space to do is to act like this is not happening and make this political choice that I'm going to say just the right thing. We need to tell people the truth about what's happening. If we don't address this with a level of urgency, it is not only a threat to our planet, it is a crisis of proportions we have never seen. Even our Joint Chiefs of Staff says that immigration that happens from climate-based disasters represents one of the greatest threats to our planet. As your United States Senator, I'm going to treat it like that greatest threat.
Thank you. Mr. Lamb.
Thank you. I think it helps to remember the scale of the problem that we are talking about. So every single year, the world as a whole emits about 58 billion tons of CO2 or equivalent, 58 billion. And by 2050, we have to make that number zero. I agree with that. That's what the UN says. That's what all of our goals, for the most part, aim toward. Now, of that 58 billion and what we have to sustain over the next 28 years, 85% of that is outside of the United States. The United States could do everything right, and we would cover 15% of the problem, and 85% of it would go unaddressed. The world as it exists today is burning more than 80% of its energy from fossil fuels right now. So this is an unbelievable problem of incredible scope and size. Why do I lead with that? Not to say that it's impossible or that we should temper our resolve, no, but to make sure we address the part of the question that Paul asked, politically realistic. We need an answer on climate that doesn't just sound good on a debate stage, but actually gets passed into law in the United States, takes care of our problems, takes care of many of the world's problems, and is sustained over the next 3 decades. So how do we do that? The fundamental thing about any policy on any of these issues of complexity is people out there who are voting who may not be fully in our camp or tied completely to our party have to feel like we're increasing opportunities for them and not taking it away. We have to protect existing jobs and create existing jobs that people understand and want to do. not talk about hypothetical jobs of the future. And so that's why things like nuclear energy, things like continuing to build pipelines, but for hydrogen instead of natural gas, things like making sure that the next 100 million electric cars that are built in the world are built here in the United States and sold here in the United States. The semiconductor plants that we just put $50 billion toward in Washington, D.C., are going to make it possible to actually develop all these technologies here. You know, just remember, when President Kennedy said we were going to the moon in 1961, Russian dogs had spent more time in the outer space than United States people had, and we got there by 1969. We can do this again, but that's the model, the Apollo program.
All right. So our next topic is a small one. It's on our democracy. And our democracy is under threat, from mob attack on our Capitol to numerous voter suppression efforts across the country. In your role as senator, how would you address these threats, and what specific actions do you believe can be taken to preserve and protect American democracy? Congressman Lamb.
Here's what I think. Our temptation when we confront a very serious problem, liberal-minded people, intellectual-minded people, is to give prescriptions for how we would change the system. And we have to. We need to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We need to pass things like H.R. 1. We need to reform Facebook and big tech so that they can't dump lies into people's heads all day, every day. All of that stuff we have to do, and it goes to the core of our democracy. We have to make it a democracy where people can actually afford to live and care about having a stake in the system. All of that is valid. But the conflict that we are in right now in the short term is a test of willpower. What happened on January 6th is that the people who attacked the Capitol, and what happened after January 6th is that the Republican Party that excused and tried to cover up and hide from their conduct has shown you how much just raw desire they have to take power, that they will do or allow something like that to happen in a country where we never thought that was possible. And what we have to do in the face of that, the option that we have, is not to pass a bunch of bills that make that impossible, because we don't have the votes right now. We should have them, but we don't. So to get those votes and do all the prescriptive things we want to do, and more importantly, to send a message to the United States that that's not who we are, and that's not what we'll accept, and that we will preserve this democracy for another generation, is we just have to go out and win elections like this one. We need groups like this to produce a presidential turnout in a non-presidential year. And we've got to do it all around the state. That's exactly what we have to do to protect this democracy. We simply have to win.
Thank you. Councilor Khalil?
I sort of agree, but I don't. We have to do more than win. In the words of Michelle Obama, there are more important things than just winning elections. And that, I think, is what has hurt us. Here we are, we've passed ACA. We've helped millions of people get health care. Our economy is strong. We've had a president who has invested in infrastructure, the American Rescue Plan. President Obama, during his administration, same thing, rescued the American economy. But yet people feel disaffected. Why are young people feeling disaffected? So I tell you what we have to do. We have to have good government, both at the small level, at the local level, and at the higher level. We actually not only have to create big ideas, but then we have to execute them. We have to sit back and let people see us do good things, do good government. That's why I'm running as a local. No one knows better about local government than a counselor. We know good government. Our constituents knock on our doors and say, my trash didn't get picked up. My kid isn't getting educated. The police harassed me today. And so what I say is that we have to have good government. And I say to young people, do not lose heart. I say to older people, do not lose heart. I say to immigrants, I say to people of all religions, do not lose heart. Register to vote. Number one, vote. Then please run for office. I am running here. I am the daughter of Palestinian Muslims from the West Bank. I am running today because I've met too many of my Palestinian American, Muslim American, and others, Haitian Americans, Muslim Americans, just so many Hindu Americans who are saying, it doesn't mean anything. African American man, a young African American man said to me, I don't believe in religion or in government. So what's left? So I'm saying to you, don't lose heart. Stand up, show grit, register to vote, and then run for office. Take care of your communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fetterman.
What is democracy? Democracy is the ability of citizens to vote and have the least amount of restrictions placed on them and the ability to trust the result of that vote. And that right now is under siege in every single state in the country where Joe Biden beat Donald Trump that allowed him to become president. Every single one. In our own Commonwealth, they are going to change our Constitution to make sure you must show your ID every single time you vote, and it's likely that's going to pass. Getting rid of local elected officials, like judges of elections that held the line in 2020, they've already gotten rid of them. You have no future in the Republican Party if you don't toe two lines. Donald Trump is the greatest president in the history of the world, and he was robbed in 2020. That is the battery acid that the Republicans have been throwing on our American democracy. And I was proud to be one of the main faces out of Pennsylvania pushing back on that toxic narrative here in Pennsylvania during the election in 2020. 7 million ballots were cast in 2020. Do you know how much voter fraud there actually was? Five. 100% of them were deceased relatives voting for the former president. Misinformation, it comes down to misinformation. Misinformation needs a champion. And if you believe that January 6th was legitimate political discourse, I'm probably not your candidate. But leaning in and telling the truth and pushing back, and Democrats voting together like Democrats to pass critical voting legislation and protections for our democracy is as fundamental as it gets. You can't have full democracy if you have compromised voting in critical battleground states, or any state for that matter. And if I'm your next United States Senator, that would absolutely be a priority of mine.
Thank you. And Mr. Kenyatta.
This is the most fundamental question. I like to remind everybody, almost everywhere I go, that our democracy is an idea. It is an idea. And it is also an experiment. It's one that every generation we've had to be steadfast in protecting and expanding. When you ask what I will do, this is a moment where I can tell you about what I've done. A lot of you probably know me because of the work that I did, not just being a face standing up against Republicans, but actually being in the room, stopping them from doing the corrosive things that they've tried to do as it relates to the right to vote. They were trying to pass and bastardize our correct oversight authority as the Pennsylvania House of Representatives to create what they were going to call an election integrity committee, which were going to allow them to do the Arizona-style audits that you've seen after the election. They wanted to do that as the election was happening. And we stopped them. We stopped them because folks spoke up, because I used every single legislative tool we had to slow it down and explain to people the seriousness of what they were trying to accomplish. But let's also be clear, what we're seeing in our democracy right now is not just folks trying to take away the right to vote. You think back to the 2016 election, a lot of folks decided to stay home. Because what I call America's basic bargain, this idea you can have one good job backed up by a union, that your kids are going to go to a good school, that if you get sick, you can go to a doctor and fill the prescription when you leave, that you can retire with a level of dignity. That is not most people's reality. And they hear Washington politicians say over and over again about all the great things they voted for. But when you look in communities like mine, not a damn thing has changed. And so if we want to preserve our democracy, then we have to grow and expand the middle class, end poverty in this country, and actually stand up for the marginalized communities that I know you all care about.
Thank you.
So our next subject is education, and I guess I would say education and opportunity. And I guess the belief is that opportunity is grounded in no small measure in the chance to get an education. The Economic Opportunity Act of 1964 established the Job Corps, a free job training and education program focused on achieving sustained employment outcomes for low-income Americans between the ages of 16 and 24. In April 2018, an Inspector General report found that the average Job Corps graduate only earned $12,486 a year, an amount which compares with the general non-college educated population. As a senator, how would you update programs like the Job Corps to produce better economic outcomes for low-income Americans? And why don't we begin with Mr. Fetterman?
Sure. First of all, I'm a big believer in Job Corps. In fact, that's how I started my career in public service. In 1995, I was in Pittsburgh's Hill District in AmeriCorps teaching GED classes to those same kind of folks, age 16 to 24. And I'm proud to say that that didn't stop with my involvement in AmeriCorps. I moved to Braddock, Pennsylvania, and for years and years, I helped young people get their GED and get their first jobs, get their driver's license, and get things of that nature. So the programming that I've started and through my work resulted in 1,000 young people getting their GEDs over the last 21 years. And I'm proud of that fact. And I understand that population. You know, the public school system and the other parts of our society failed them, and we must as a society not leave them behind. And that's why I got into that line of work, you know, from the get-go. We need to make sure that that program is vital enough to make the transition. It's a tough transition, quite frankly, because you're facing a lot of difficulties moving forward. You know, the work that I've done in that field told me a couple of things. One, there needs to be a long-term engagement there. There needs to be a more codified path to trade school. There needs to be debt forgiveness if your first chance doesn't work. There needs to be other wraparound social service as well, too, because that population is also dealing with a lot of challenges that prohibit them from succeeding. We must fortify the kind of program Job Corps is, make it better, and that's how I've spent the first part of my career in public service doing just that, and no one understands better in the United States Senate, if I'm your next senator, just how critical those investments in working with that population is.
Great, thank you. Mr. Kenyatta.
So the folks who you're talking about being served, a lot of them look just like me. A lot of them came from communities just like mine. My dad was a social worker and my mom was a home health care aide. And when they separated, I was pretty young. What that meant for me is I lived 6 different places by the time I graduated high school. So my mom wasn't always able to cover the rent. What it meant for me is I got my first job at 12 years old, washing dishes at this little vegan soul food restaurant. And they paid me under the table. If you have a business, don't do that. You got to pay the taxes. But what it also meant more tragically is I lost both of my parents by the time I was 27 because they didn't have the type of health care they deserved. I mention all of that because it is very easy for us to talk about serving communities who have not been served and what program we need to help communities that have been victim of years of structural inequality. Fixing Job Corps, that's important. And as a senator, first of all, we need to have a hearing. We need to know more about what they're doing, how they can do better. But what's more important is we need to change the Senate. It's not good enough in one breath to say, I really wish we could help folks from communities like Malcolm, but then when a candidate from a community like mine runs, we say, well, oh, I don't know if you can win. We have to ask ourselves who we are, vote our values. If we had a Senate that looked more like the communities we wanted to serve, we would deal with the structural issues around education that mean your zip code is more likely to determine your path in life than anything else. We need to actually deal with things like criminal justice reform that have trapped whole communities in a cycle of being in and out of incarceration. We need to deal with the healthcare disparities that make it more likely that people can actually live their lives. We need to take on the big banks that have a pattern and practice of not lending to Black and brown business owners. This is a structural issue. Job Corps is important, but having a U.S. Senate that looks like this country is even more important.
Great, thank you. Councilor Khalil.
Thank you. My mom and dad are immigrants, and we opened a store, a clothing store, in 1972. All my aunts and uncles are also immigrants, and they also owned whether grocery stores or carpet businesses, etc. So I think any type of economic development, any type of Job Corps must deal with entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship really is the great way to get out of poverty. My mom and dad don't have a much formal education. My mom and dad finished about 5th grade. When they came here, they spoke very little English other than what they learned in school. But they were smart and savvy. They were farmers, and they just knew how to talk to people. And so they started a business. And here's how they started that business, though. And this is what's super important. When my dad came here, his uncle in Lawrence County was a steel worker. And he gave my dad that money to come to the United States. His cousins, we call them cousins, in New York were in the textile industry. And they gave him mentorship. They introduced him to vendors. They introduced him to where to shop, how to sell. My one uncle kept him out of my dad out of trouble. The other one showed him how to sell, and the other one told him how to read English. And so my dad started his own business, and my mom joined. And so what I say is when I talk to people, I'm one of the only candidates to have this as part of my platform. Entrepreneurship has to be taught starting in high school, right? If you take a look at our high schools now, in many schools across the state and the country, we have lost living skills, shop, home ec. We don't even teach finance. So I would join with Senator Markley, I believe, of Oregon, and bring those back to the schools and bring back entrepreneurship into the schools so that kids can know and give them mentorships, have them get out into the community. There are many communities, like Malcolm says, who do not have a mentor like my dad did. We would make that connection in the high schools. Philadelphia, Pittsburgh have all these mentorships, have all these great companies. Let's introduce our kids to them while they're in high school. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Lamb.
I think the problem with Job Corps, as I understand it, is it hasn't changed with the times. It was an appropriate model in the 1960s when it was created, and maybe even for some time afterward. But the economy is different today. It's much more fluid, and the types of jobs that are being demanded are very different. And so I think we have sort of at least two categories of opportunities that we can look at and figure out how we refit. I'm always typically a mend it, don't end it type of guy with government programs. There's a way we can do it better, and we can channel the money and energy of Job Corps into something else. My basic philosophy on job training programs is that we have to now insist as the federal government that anything we're paying for that is a job training program ends in a job and not a piece of paper. And there are still too many programs across the federal government that don't require that. The infrastructure bill that we just passed is going to create hundreds of thousands, if not millions of jobs in the next decade, doing mostly physical labor. We are already looking at a shortage for those positions, and so we'll have to do a big job to train people up to take those careers. The labor unions can handle that entirely. Their in-house apprenticeship programs do exactly this. They get people on the job site early. It costs them nothing. They earn money while they're training. That is going to suck up an enormous amount of demand. We just have to provide the programs that get people from where they are into the union apprenticeship programs, and those are pre-apprentice, soft skills focused. We fund them. We don't quite fund them enough. The second category is everything in medicine, medical tech, home health care. Some of you may know that right here in Pittsburgh at Ebenezer Baptist Church in the Hill District, CVS has opened one of its only fully corporate-funded worker training centers in the entire country. And people enroll in there, and a few months later, they're working at a full-time position at CVS as a pharmacy assistant, as a call center operator in the store. It's an incredible investment that they've made. And so far, their graduation rate into a job is about 95%. And the only reason it isn't 100% is because 2 of the pharmacy tech students went to school to become full-time pharmacists. That's where our Job Corps dollars need to be going.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so this next question is on a topic that has often emerged as the word of the day, and that's on the filibuster. And this is a two-part question. As a member of the Senate majority, what reforms to the filibuster, the hold rules, and other Senate procedures would you support? And something we don't want to think about is if you are a member of the minority party, which of those reforms will you support anyway? Mr. Fetterman.
We were the first actual candidate campaign to call for the elimination of the filibuster. Because if you don't support the elimination of the filibuster, you believe either one, that the status quo, as us being in the majority, you're not getting transformative legislation passed what we need to, or you believe that there are 10 to 12 Republican senators of conscience out there that are going to suddenly come to their senses and say, you're right. We want comprehensive voting law protections instituted. We want comprehensive gun control legislation passed. We want Build Back Better after all. And if you believe that there are 10 to 12 of those Republican senators that are looking to join us, those really are our choices. And then some people say, well, John, What if the Republicans, get power? They're going to, well, of course they're going to. Do you think they're going to have careful deliberations and pretend that if they are in the opportunity to run the table, they're not going to do the exact same thing to us? If we're not willing to eliminate the filibuster, we are saying we are happy or we're satisfied with $7.25 an hour for a minimum wage. That is a disgrace. That is a disgrace, and that has to change in our country. Eliminating the filibuster, I think, is Republicans being ruthless and united when they want to be. They get the stuff done. Who's Merrick Garland? He's our Attorney General. He should have been a Supreme Court justice. Why can't Democrats be ruthless and united and get some important legislation passed and done while we can? Because we know the other side, if given the chance, will run the table on us as well too. Democrats need to vote together like Democrats. The voters of this country made us the majority from the White House, Senate, and the House. We need to take advantage of that and eliminate the filibuster.
Thank you. Mr. Kenyatta.
So here's where leadership really matters. There are some folks up here who it took an insurrection for them to come to the conclusion that we need to get rid of the filibuster. Once the polls said the filibuster was fine and Democrats supported it, now it's okay to support. I've known for a long time that the filibuster was a problem in terms of advancing critical legislation, particularly as a black man in this country. And the filibuster has been used repeatedly throughout the time that we've had it to block progress on critical pieces of legislation, to hold up the nomination of Thurgood Marshall. We've known this for a long time, that the filibuster has been a problem. When we get to the Senate, when this campaign gets to the Senate, hell yes, I'm going to be about getting rid of the filibuster. And we have to just use our eyes and just use the Google machine to see that Republicans have already limited the filibuster time after time again, chipped away at it when it was helpful to them. And so we have to get honest with ourselves and say that, hey, we do need to deal with some of the structural issues that exist. And maybe that's a liberal-minded prescription that we shouldn't worry about. But I think if we're going to save our democracy, there are some critical reforms. The filibuster is one of them. We will not protect a woman's right to choose until we get rid of the filibuster. We will not be able to do the things that we need to do as it relates to addressing the climate emergency if we still have the filibuster. We won't be able to do it on voting rights. We won't be able to get the Equality Act passed to protect LGBTQ folks across this country until we get rid of the filibuster. It's not good enough to just be another Democratic vote who will vote with the majority. We need a senator that can look a little bit ahead, look around the corner, be willing to take some of the slings and arrows when people say this might not be the most popular idea right now. But we are all here in this room understand that when we do the right thing, when we stand up for our values, history will stand up for us, and we can win big elections when we go bold.
Thank you. Ms. Khalil.
I agree with my two colleagues here. I think we do have to end the filibuster. I mean, it really is basically like a Jim Crow type law. It was meant really to keep people in check, to make sure that African Americans were not guaranteed rights. But I think there's a deeper question there, which I like. What would happen if we were in the minority? And I think that is where I feel that I can point out that what we need to do and what we're terrible at doing is that we Democrats go ahead and fight amongst ourselves publicly while the Republicans sit back and look just so united and so in charge. We need to govern well. The point of this event today, the Barbara Daly Danko, was that she believed in work for good government, right? That's what she's about. And so we have to be about working for good government. And that means that we have to look across the spectrum, across from the local government, from the state government. And when I say the local government, your school boards, your libraries, your either your townships or your borough councils, and you have to show good government. And you have to articulate the vision and the actual things that Democrats are doing, and that we Democrats are the reason why there's health care in America. We Democrats are the reason why there's Medicaid and Medicare in the United States. We are the reason there's a Pell Grants and there are, Social Security. We are the reason. But you know what? When people look around and they see Democrats govern, they see in our big cities we can't pick up the trash. That's wrong. Like, we have to have good governance. We have to stand for it. We have to call out Democrats who do not know how to keep their streets safe and clean and treat poor communities one way and wealthier communities in another way. If you go into Philadelphia on Germantown Avenue, one area is spotless. It has all the services. Another area is left decrepit with nothing. Good governance is how we win, no matter what.
Thank you. And Mr. Lamb.
I also support getting rid of the filibuster entirely. I would cast that vote on my first day in the United States Senate. And I think, one of the reasons our party is so united on this and so many of the different groups that support our party are united is that the Republicans will get rid of the legislative filibuster when they determine it's in their interest. Mitch McConnell didn't think it was in their interest while Trump was president because he didn't want Trump to force him to hold votes on a lot of things that he didn't really want to do. But when that is no longer the issue because either Trump or McConnell or neither of them are there, they're going to get rid of the filibuster. They did it for Supreme Court justices, which is what they care about the most. If you ask me, I actually think we're going to have a more productive Senate on both sides of the aisle when the filibuster is gone, because there's just going to be more legislative trains leaving the station. And down there, when a bill is going to pass, it happens with the defense bill every single year. A lot of non-defense things get hung on and funded through the defense bill, and actually nobody knows that better than the institution we're standing in right now. So I think we're going to get more of that when the filibuster is gone, and I'm for getting rid of it.
Thank you.
So our next topic is foreign affairs, foreign policy. Speaking of Ukraine, so in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, what additional steps would you support to address the Russian threat to international stability? And in this moment, I would ask, are we doing enough? But the other part of the question is, what factors would you consider in deciding whether or not to vote to commit U.S. troops to an overseas engagement in this moment? So why don't we start with Councilor
I
Khalil.
do not support sending American troops into combat. The United States has been in endless war, and it's enough. Our people we need to take care of the United States. I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I'm not a Republican. I wouldn't vote for a Republican. But he was right on 2 points with Europe. They did not spend enough on NATO, and the Germans should never have built that gas pipeline from Russia. They should never have. And it was funded, I might add, by our European allies, the Danes, the Swedes, et cetera. I do not support that type of behavior on a part of NATO, and so they opened themselves up. No, we're not doing enough, because really the reason why Putin was able to do what Putin did was because we've given up internationally on human rights. We've given up on whether it's, depending on what country you're from, you can be anti-Semitic, you can be Islamophobic, you can be anti-Hindu, you can be anti-Sikh, you can be anti-anything. You can persecute, you can be anti-Palestinian, you can take homes. We've done this. We've allowed it. We, the United States, invaded a country under false pretenses. So why is that? So Putin's like, hey, yeah, I can do it. We've ignored Haitians at our borders and treated them with such disregard. We put children in cages. Well, because we've given up on human rights. So to me, we first have to go back to saying, I stand for human rights. I believe in human rights. I will fight for human rights. I don't care who you are. I will speak up to it. And I think that is how you stop a Putin. You sit back and you say, we're going to hold you accountable and hold everyone accountable for violation of human rights. So whether you're Saudi Arabia and you're persecuting Yemenis, or whether you're in Bahrain and you're persecuting Shiites, or whether you're the Israelis and you're persecuting Palestinians, or whether you're Jewish people who lived in Arab countries and you've lost your valuables and your livelihood, we're going to speak up. Whether you're gay in Saudi Arabia or in any other country that sits back and persecutes gays, we're going to speak up. And that's how we beat the Putins of the world.
Thank you. Mr. Kenyatta.
Let me just start by saying Vladimir Putin is a thug. He is a war criminal, and he needs to be held accountable, as he has been so far, by the international community and also in Geneva. I will also say this is one of the reasons I supported President Biden on the day he announced his campaign, earlier than anybody up here on this stage, when all across the country and all across Pennsylvania supporting him and other Democrats. And that was because I believed that he was going to be uniquely able to rally the world in a moment like this. And you look at what this administration has done when I don't think many people, even in the alliance themselves, in the NATO alliance, thought we would get to this level of unanimity and of focus. Vladimir Putin is paying a huge cost for this barbaric invasion. I don't even think they've reopened the stock market since he closed it down the day after he invaded. The ruble is worth nothing. He is completely isolated in the world, and the president has made the right decisions and decisions that don't commit NATO troops. We are sending over unarmed drones, which I think we could have done earlier, but fine, they're getting there. We're sending over unmanned missile defense systems. We are coordinating with partners in places like Poland to say, can you send over your Russian-made fighter jets that you have, because the Ukrainians know how to operate those and it will give them better control in the sky. And I think we need to look at admitting more NATO members, particularly like Finland. The president of Finland was here recently, and he sounded more open to it than he had in previous times. And so I hope we can move forward quickly. But I will say, as much as I do not want to commit U.S. troops, that's going to be Vladimir Putin's decision if he chooses to invade a NATO country. Because we have a responsibility under Article 5 of that agreement to stand up for other countries if they're attacked. Hopefully we can stop him here. But if he invades a NATO country, we don't have a choice.
Thank you. Mr. Lamb.
Sure. Look, the Ukrainians have the most effective and experienced army in Europe, and they also have just mountains and mountains of personal courage and resolve. And that's why they are still fighting today, and they have fought the Russians to a stalemate. But they never could have done that without the weapons, ammunition, and communication systems that we've provided them, not only since Putin invaded, but for the last 8 years. I mean, since 2014, the United States has given billions of dollars of direct funding and assistance and training to the Ukrainian military to make them what they are today. In the first week of the invasion, I read this was public information. The Ukrainian military fired 300 Javelin anti-tank missiles in combat, and the number of Russian vehicles destroyed was 280, which they did because we taught them how to do that. And that's why that happened. That's the part of the role that America plays in protecting democracy writ large. You know, this conflict gets talked about as Putin versus us. The conflict is that the Ukrainians are standing up for themselves and something that they want, the ability to govern themselves, just like we do and just like our ancestors did. As far as risking American lives, we will do that to protect America's interests. We will do it not to protect business interests or not to protect a president's political interests. We'll do it to protect American interests. And that's why there already are service members risking their lives today, stationed in Poland and Romania and all of the neighboring NATO countries, because one of the most important American interests that there are is the health and continuation of the NATO alliance. Basically, all of our combat power, all of our economic power, all of our power to promote human rights and dignity around the world comes when we multiply it by 2 or 3 by sticking with NATO, keeping Europe together and with us. That is Biden's greatest achievement here, and what we really need is the endurance to make sure it continues, and our troops are going to be a big part of that.
Great. Mr. Fetterman.
Yeah. I fully support everything that President Biden has done in this crisis. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, the risk of a hot war with Russia. You know, what would a hot war with Russia look like? You know, they've used a small amount of their military capabilities and certainly none of their cyber war capabilities, at least that we're aware of. So Russia still has plenty of cards to play, and everybody agrees that Vladimir Putin is a war criminal and he's acting against the world's interest. You know, we have been appropriate in gathering unified support to drive their economy and hurt their standing in the world. But at the end of the day, it's got to be targeted on helping the refugees, the 3 million refugees that have fled the Ukraine, helping Poland and other allies deal with the refugee crisis, arming them when it's appropriate, and it can be done without sparking a hot war with Russia as well, too. Hawkish on Ukraine is risking a hot war that I don't think this country could ill afford to get involved in. That's fundamentally, I think, the truth there. when would I want to send troops? You know, at graduate school, I had the privilege of studying with Robert McNamara, the former defense secretary under President Kennedy, architect of the Vietnam War, and he said he got it wrong. The humility that it took to say we got it wrong in the Vietnam War. This idea, before I would send American troops, I'd be damn sure that this makes sense and we actually know what's true on the ground. We didn't learn our lesson as a country. Look at what happened in Iraq. You know, that's the most fundamental truth in American foreign policy when it comes to sending in our troops. Understand the dynamic and the truth on the ground and making sure that it makes sense for America to do so before we risk American lives.
Great. Thank you.
All right, a general question for each of you. What issues are we not paying attention to that we should be focusing on? And what course of action should we be taking to address these issues? Mr. Kenyatta.
Thank you for bringing that up. Mental health care for our kids. I will tell you, the worst day I've had since I've been a legislator, and I work with some real knuckleheads, so, has been getting a call from a woman I met, Miss Linda, knocking on the door when I was running for office. And we formed a really good relationship. And she called me one day really late at night and said, Rep, my grandson died by suicide. And I went out and sat with the parents and the family late night at a hotel by the airport. And I started calling folks to make sure we could cover the funeral expenses, that we could get them out of the house that they were in to somewhere else. But the promise I made to them was we were going to make sure we never forget little Phil and all the other little Phils. Little Phil was in a school where there was just one mental health professional in a school with hundreds and hundreds of kids. And so I worked with a Republican to introduce a bill called Phillips Law, one of the most co-sponsored pieces of legislation we had the first session we introduced it, to reimagine the way we provide mental health care for our kids, to get a handle on how many mental health professionals we have in the first place, and then to have a mandated ratio of how many mental health professionals are in our schools. I was campaigning for then Vice President Biden in New Hampshire, and I talked to him about this. And I said, Mr. Vice President, you really ought to think about including this in your platform or something like it. If you go to the Biden-Harris website to see their agenda, you will see that he mentions my bill as one of the things we need to do nationwide. There's a lot of things I want to do as your senator, so many important conversations we've had. But when I get to stand next to the president and have little Phil's family standing behind him as he signs that bill into law, that'll be one of the most important things I do as your next U.S. Senator. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lamb.
Sure. You know, one of the things in general I think we're probably not talking enough about, we're talking a lot of policy, we're not talking a lot of politics, you know, in terms of the ability to go out and get done what is the task before us, which is winning a general election in November under very difficult circumstances. It's going to be a hard year with inflation, approval ratings, the international situation. But, you know, the issue that I remember most from 2020, which was also a difficult year for us, I mean, we all celebrated President Biden's win, but we lost 11 Democrats in the House of Representatives. We lost sides in both sides of the Pennsylvania legislature. We lost 2 statewide offices on the same exact ballot where President Biden won by 80,000 votes. And one of the biggest issues there had to do with law enforcement. It had to do with what we do with our police officers. That situation has probably only become more pressing since then. In 2021, Philadelphia had the highest number of homicides that it has ever had, numbers that people didn't think they would ever reach after the crack epidemic was over, and they did. People are really looking for answers from us on gun violence, and they're going to get answers from a Democratic candidate. We have to make the decision whether it's the candidate that can provide the right answers and actually convince people to come vote for us. We know what they're going to get with a Republican: fear-mongering, mandatory minimum sentences, higher sentences, blaming the Democrats and all the rest of it, even though the crime wave began under Trump, by the way, in 2020. What you get from someone like me, who is someone who has prosecuted the illegal purchase and trafficking of weapons for a living. I know what the federal government's tools are to stop gun trafficking and limit the flow of guns into these cities. I know exactly what the federal government used to do and should do again to prevent gun violence by actually funding interventions into the lives of the people who are most at risk. In any police precinct in Philadelphia, they can name for you the 25 people who are most likely to shoot or be shot at. And we can do things to stop that from happening early in a kid's life. But it takes credibility on the issue of law enforcement. I've been there, I've done it, and I think I can deliver that.
Thank you. Mr. Fetterman.
I think one of the fundamental things that we're not focused on enough, quite frankly, is $7.25. $7.25. That is what is legal to pay a fellow human being in this state and in this country for an hour of their labor. What can you actually accomplish if you are a single parent with 1 or 2 children if you're working for $7.25 an hour? Can you pay your rent? Can you even buy food? Can you afford anything? A car? Even a bus pass? You can't. Why do we in this society stand for this lie and pretend it's okay? You know, an earlier question talked about the average salary of a Job Corps graduate of $12,000 and change. Well, that sounds suspiciously like $7.25 an hour for 40 hours a week. You know, what if it was $15 an hour? What if that was the floor? What if we built dignity into our minimum wage? I stood in this forum 6 years ago, and I was calling for that. 6 years later, the party's evolved to that position, but the wage is stuck at $7.25 an hour, and it's a disgrace. It is a disgrace. You know, it is not a political issue, if you ask my opinion. It is a mathematical one. If you pay somebody X and their expenses are Y, you will always be in the negative, and that is a detriment to American families. That is a detriment to our society, and it's not fair. In America, if you work hard, play by the rules, you deserve a basic level of dignity. And how, as a Democratic caucus, are we okay with that? How are we okay with that? You know, you want to talk about democratic unity? Right now, Hobby Lobby is starting you out at $18.50 an hour, and our Democratic caucus can't get past $7.25, and it's a disgrace.
Thank you. Ms. Khalil.
To me, yes, yes, yes. And the invisible people, people we don't see, people we don't talk to, or people who sit back and through grit and determination and through fortitude sit back and say, okay, I can just do this. Today, as I came in here, a Chad Townsend from upstairs who owns Marley's Homemade Ice Cream told me that he had rescinded his RRF loan when he applied during the pandemic. He doesn't complain. He hires employees. He does what he has to do. And he's asking, you know, hey, just mention my name and mention the struggles that I went through. And let's try to get his RRF loans forgiven. I'm sorry, the ones that were rescinded, he was given loans now, so let's get those forgiven. The woman I met last night at the Hindu temple, everyone was praying, it was a holy day, and I heard a scream in the back. And I'm like, what is going on? There was a woman back there with a child, 26-year-old child, who was severely autistic. This child, I went over and I spoke to the woman, and she told me my child stopped having services when she hit 21. And many of you I know of people whose adult children have had their services stopped once they've hit 21. And so the parents sit back with family members, and as an attorney, I've met parents and helped them get a guardianship of these adult children, and they just make do, and they get by. But yet we as a nation can do so much better. And here was the worst part. She lost her job. So think about this. She has an aide that helps her with this 26-year-old child. Nobody, and she just manages. Her child was given a program, but there are no programs. So let's remember the invisible, the homeless, the folks who in food insecurity in our country. We have to remember there are so many invisible people in our country, and we have to look at them. Thank you.
Thank you.
So here's a question that is like one sentence, really, and this is the Supreme Court. But what are your thoughts on expanding the size of the Supreme Court? And why don't I start with Mr. Lamb?
Yeah, I think it's a trap, to be honest with you. I understand why people want it and why they want to talk about it because of how frustrated they are with the people who are on the court. But if we want to succeed on all the issues that we're talking about here today, and we want to succeed over time, people need to believe that we're really fighting for them on the top couple of things that they care about, their pocketbook issues, what their family is going through. The size of the Supreme Court, I think it's over the head of a lot of people, and it's not something that comes up naturally in conversation. That being said, if we run campaigns and win elections, we can legislate Roe v. Wade. We can change the campaign finance laws. We can change a lot of the things that have been left to the court over years because the Senate doesn't function. And then if we stay in power, we can nominate better judges to replace the ones that are on there. So I'm not in favor of it.
Okay. Councilor Khalil.
Actually, I am in favor of it, sort of because of what Congressman Lamb was talking about. You know, this Supreme Court, especially Sam Alito, Justice Roberts, these are very calculating people. I mean, I remember reading that Justice Alito had spoken in front of, I believe, the Federalist Society when they were in the minority, and he told them, "Be patient, be patient." You know, and so they worked it, you know, starting from the local level, built government, and then they could control the Senate and et cetera, and the rest is history. Yes, we need to be patient. I mean, I do agree, but Sam Alito is not going to change. John Roberts, if he is our most moderate Republican, we're in trouble. You know, Amy Barrett is not going to change. None of these people are going to change the most fundamental things that are important to us. I mean, abortion is going to be overturned. I mean, it really is just a matter of when they just announce it. So I think, abortion rights, excuse me. So I think we don't have a choice. You know, hey, if it was good enough for President Roosevelt to threaten it, I think it's good enough for Joe Biden, President Biden. We have to show grit. We have to show toughness. And that is what I think is missing with us. We sit back and we try to be wishy-washy. Let's show some grit. Let's sit back and hit them in the eye and say, you know what, we're not afraid of you. And then also, we have to sit back and go out into our constituents. We have to go into rural Pennsylvania, into cities, into areas that people have said, who are voting Republican. I'm going to tell you what's going on real quick. Republicans are going door to door in African-American communities, Hispanic communities, and immigrant communities, and they're telling them, don't look at the folks in Harrisburg. Don't look at the folks in Washington, D.C. They're just, that's media. I'm normal. Believe me, we care about the things you care about. We care about small businesses. We care about crime. We care about education. We care. And so these people go, wow, I guess that is the media. So folks, let's go out there and be proud to be Democrats and start talking to people.
So I gave a speech 6 months after the insurrection on the battlefields of Gettysburg. You can go to malcolmkenyatta.com and see it. And there I laid out an 8-point plan of what I thought we needed to do to preserve our democracy. And reforming the Supreme Court was on that list. And it's not about retribution, and it's not about partisan politics. It's about the health and future of our democracy. First, let's dispatch with the notion that expanding the Supreme Court is actually a new idea. It's not a new idea. It's an old idea. It's something that we've done multiple times during the history of this country. But let's also understand that the folks who expanded the Supreme Court, who packed the court, his name is Mitch McConnell. He packed the court when he completely gave a certain finger on your hand to President Obama and to his rightful authority as president to nominate and then have the Senate advise and consent on that nomination. They refused to even meet with Merrick Garland. Some of them may have to meet with him because of their involvement in the insurrection, but they didn't want to meet with him then. If we are going to preserve our democracy, yes, it's going to take winning this election. Like, I don't know what Democrat wants to lose the election. But what it's also going to take, think about this vote. This is a vote for 6 years. You're not electing somebody for a state rep, and that's a pretty good job. But for 6 years, we're talking about having somebody representing Pennsylvania, standing up for our values. And I said this before about leadership. If the polls changed and then most people supported expanding the Supreme Court, I think you get different answers on this stage. People are making a poll-based decision, not a decision about the future health of our democracy. The Supreme Court has become too politicized, and having court reform is one of the most important things we can do to restore people's faith in it. That's why President Biden, as one of the first things he did, created a commission to even study this question. And I don't think President Biden's outside of the mainstream.
Great. Mr. Fetterman.
I don't support expanding the Supreme Court. We're Democrats. we don't structurally change something just because we are appalled or frustrated by the current outcome. I'm no more frustrated than I'm sure everyone in the room at the 6-3 tilt. But that's not to say that we need to fundamentally reshape it because of that fact. If it was reversed and if it was a 6-3 Democratic favor, who would be in support of expanding it? None of us. I think we have to be consistent with our values. The truth is, at least 2 of those appointments were because 2 Supreme Court justices passed away when they were in office, the wrong time. Not that there's a good time whenever to pass away, of course, but Donald Trump was afforded that opportunity to appoint those 2. And that's unfortunate. And then the third one was Mitch McConnell being ruthless and united and blocking Merrick Garland. I wish we, for a million reasons, would have won in 2016 and Secretary Clinton would have made an amazing president and appointed a Supreme Court justice that would have transformed it as well, too. But as a Democrat, I believe in consistency, and I believe in doing the work and making sure that we will appoint the Supreme Court justice, and I support and applaud President Biden on his choice to replace retiring Justice Breyer. And at the end of the day, packing the Supreme Court, I don't believe is the answer.
Great. Thank you.
All right, candidates, time flies when you're having fun. We have run out of time. We didn't even get to all of our questions. But we really appreciate the time that you spent with us here at CMU. And you each have 2 minutes to give closing remarks. So, Mr. Fetterman.
I just want to say thank you to the organizers and Carnegie Mellon University for hosting this. It's a pleasure to return 6 years later. The policies and the topics and the positions and the places and people that I've championed haven't changed in those 6 years, but the party certainly has evolved in that direction. My campaign is much different than it was in 2016. I barely had money for gas to get to events. Today, we are the most well-resourced Senate campaign of a challenger or a Democrat or Republican nationally. We have 190,000 donors. 190,000 donors. If our donor family was a city, it would be Pennsylvania's 3rd largest behind Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. What does that translate into on the ground? We're in nearly 90% of Pennsylvania's zip codes. 90% of Pennsylvania's zip codes have a density of our donors living in them. That's a new map. I believe we're going to need a new map to win in Pennsylvania in 2022. It's going to be a tough cycle, without a doubt. I'm also proud to say that our campaign is financed $28 a pop. I'm proud to say that our campaign is Pennsylvania powered. Ours is the only campaign that is financially supported with a majority of Pennsylvania dollars from actual Pennsylvania voters in the campaign as well, too. What does that look like to have that kind of grassroots enthusiasm? It looks like the kind of campaign that we've built, and we have 4,500 volunteers getting ready. It's important to win this race. No Democrat on this stage has the market cornered on electability. We believe we have a good chance to win, whether it's polling or whether it's the kind of grassroots enthusiasm that we've accrued. But at the end of the day, this seat is critical, and I'm proud to have been one half of the team that that helped add 1 million votes to Governor Wolf's total in 2018 versus 2014. Running for the Senate in Pennsylvania is a statewide race, and we have run and won here in Pennsylvania already.
Thank you. Mr. Kenyatta.
First of all, thank you. What an incredible opportunity, thoughtful, serious questions, and you do the namesake of this forum. You do her great honor by continuing this tradition. Let me start by being a little honest, and whether you want me to or not, it's about to happen. There are so many folks in this race who've said, just got to swallow it. You might not be the nominee you want, but don't you want to win? And so forget everything else. We just have to focus on winning. We need to interrogate that idea. There are folks who say that folks who look like majority of the folks in this room, that you would never vote for me because I'm black and I'm gay, that you would never vote for me. I know different. I know that you all came here today because you wanted to hear serious solutions about how we move this country forward. You came here today and you do the work that you do because you believe that the stake of our Commonwealth in our country that it's on the line right now. When we think about winning this election, we have to think about how we win this election. We win this election by turning out Democrats, by turning out the base of our party. That means young people. That means progressive voters. That means black voters. And there's somebody on this stage who can do that. His name is Malcolm Kenyatta. You have a chance to vote for him. And we can do it because we know that when we nominate candidates that reflect the real concerns that people have, when we nominate candidates who understand what's broken in their bones, who get it because they've lived it, those candidates are best able to go to all corners of our Commonwealth and speak with a level of urgency and authenticity about what is broken. The Democratic nominee will have enough money. We will all come together and make sure they get elected. That's how we've won special elections out here, because all the Democrats came together and got it done. And we'll get it done by leaning into our base, fighting for our values, and not thinking we need to make the false choice between our values and winning. We can and will do both. I'm Malcolm Kenyatta, working person running for the U.S. Senate, and I want to earn your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Khalil.
It's such an honor to be here today. I want to second Malcolm when I say that I'm so happy to be at the Barbara Daly Danko Forum and that her whole focus was on work for good government. I am the daughter of Palestinian immigrants. My mom and dad came to the United States with very little. We are thankful to a gentleman who lived up in Lawrence County, my uncle, who was a steel worker. And we're thankful for the American dream. As a local counselor, I can tell you that people are hurting, that every day people are making this country great, but they're doing it at great sacrifice to themselves and their families. When I started this campaign, my dad said, Alex, listen, people win elections, people lose elections. Do good. And I have to tell you, there's a lot that needs to be done here, and we've all talked about it. And every day Democrats do good, every day even Republicans do good, I should say, and independents. But people are hurting, and they need to know that we're there fighting for them. It pains me to hear of a woman in Clarion County who couldn't afford her prescription drugs. It pains me to listen to a mother who tells me, I just lost a job and I've got a 26-year-old autistic child and have no services for her. It pains me to hear a mother tell me her daughter died of cancer or her daughter was raped. It pains me to hear about suicide. It pains me to hear that in Chester County, they have a rash of suicides going on at the high school. And why is that? Because people are losing faith. Why are they losing faith? Because we are not communicating to them. We are not making their lives better. We are outsourcing jobs. Manufacturing has gone abroad. People look at their lives and say, what is there for my child today and tomorrow? I say we, that's why I'm asking you to vote for me. I care about the invisible people. I care about the suffering that is going on in this country. And I care most of all about people feeling that they have a future today and tomorrow. My name is Alex Khalil. I'm running for the United States Senate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And to close us out, Mr. Lamb.
Thank you all very much for your time and attention, and I know for the many, many things you do for our party outside of this room. The stakes of this election are incredibly high. I think you all know that. I've run 3 campaigns before this that were also in very high-stakes situations, and over that period of time, my campaign and I, working in concert with many and many of you, have turned out literally hundreds of thousands of people to vote for us in difficult territory. People of all types, people of all races, men, women, people from outside the country, inside the country, steel workers, wealthy people, we've had them all. And that's how you win, by building a really big coalition of people exactly like that. President Biden felt the same way. You know, when it comes to turnout and the different arguments that people make about turnout, the highest turnout getter in the history of our state is President Joe Biden. You know, not necessarily the one you'd predict if it was all about demographics or how you looked or where you came from or whatever. People turn out and vote because of the stakes for them, what they think is going to be impacted for them and their family in this particular election. And I think the stakes of this Senate race are crystal clear. We've been talking about them all day. It's a 50-50 Senate, and if we don't find a way to elect 2 more senators who will get rid of the filibuster, we will not get action on issues like immigration and gun violence and Build Back Better and protecting women's right to choose and protecting the right to vote with the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. There's a list of bills waiting in line for a Senate that is ready to act on them. What I can offer you in this race is very, very simple and distinct. I have voted for every bill on that list and many more as a member of the House of Representatives, in a lot of cases twice or 3 times, and I've defended my seat while doing it. But secondly, I do have the experience of going out and talking to these people whose votes we need. If you think you can elect any Democrat in a situation like this one and we'll all work together and they'll win, talk to the people that lost in 2020. Not everybody did win. Joe Biden did because of decisions he made on the campaign trail on policy. We can make those same decisions in this election, win the election, protect the democracy, and most importantly, deliver for all the people who have so much at stake in those bills that we mentioned and everything else we talked about here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.